Hello, I'm Dr. Ron England, and I'm going to go over simple JavaScript-based menus today. And I'm specifically going to show you a menu that comes from the website javascriptarray.com. And I looked at a lot of different JavaScript menus, including ones that I've written to show you, but this menu really embodies the simplicity and good design practices that I want to have you see when you're designing and working with menus. Do realize that if you're creating menus for websites, there's plenty of different menus that are out there that can be incorporated into your site, some of them using different types of tools, but most of them just utilizing cascading style sheets in JavaScript. But I want you to also understand how these menus work. And this is a very good example of seeing how the menu itself works. So let's first look at the menu itself. Okay, so I'm going to go to the menu itself. This is running off of my desktop, and this is a menu where you can see I have different menu items, and as I move the mouse over other menu items, you can see that they highlight. I have the ability to see a highlighting level that goes down as I move over this, and if I take my mouse completely off, it stays for 1 second and then disappears, which really makes it a very handy and usable menu. Now, this menu is only a single level menu, but at the same site, they've actually got very good examples of multi-level menus. This lecture should give you the ability to be able to use and understand how both of those work. So let's first go into the code itself for this menu. I'm going to start with the HTML code. And the HTML code, starting with the fact that the menu itself is embedded as an unordered list. An unordered list in HTML allows you to have lists of items that can be basically in tree form and nested. And this is using the real capability of HTML and a structure within HTML that you should understand, rather than coming up with some other structure or some sort of way of using an array to handle the items within the menu. This menu itself works very well with this. So right here I have the unordered list, and the unordered list has an ID of SDDM, which stands for single or simple drop-down menu. Within this I have a number of list items, LI, 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 and if you're familiar with unordered lists, you should know that unordered lists are simply a collection of list items, and list items can have unordered lists embedded within them. That gives you multi-level menus. Now, this list item itself has an anchor tag that specifically has an on-mouse over and an on-mouse out event where it captures these events that are occurring. On-mouse over and on-mouse out are pretty much self-explanatory as far as events go. But when the on-mouse over occurs, you call a JavaScript function mopen and mCloseTime on each of the individual events. Also within this list item, I have a div tag, and within the start and stop of this div tag, I've got 3 other anchors, and this div tag also captures on mouse over and on mouse out. On the on mouse over, it actually calls a different function than the on mouse over for the list item itself. So if we were to go back to the web page we had there, you can see this is a top level. These 3 anchor tags themselves are anchor tags that are within that div, and then here I've got another set with another set of divs. This, by the way, the ID of this anchor tag is M1, the ID of this anchor tag is M2, and there are no secondary anchor tags on the other ones. So let's look and see what happens when I do this. So first we'll look at this anchor for the home. What happens? So let's go to this function, JavaScript function, mopen M1. Realize that M1 is everything that's within this blue area, which is this div tag. So I'm passing the name, this string here, M1, to mopen. If I go over here to mopen, the first thing that I do is I call another function called mCancelCloseTime. And what that really does is it stops the timer. And we're not using a timer when you go over this, so it turns it off. And then the second line is it looks to see if this variable called ddMenuItem exists, and if it does exist, it sets the style.visibility of this to hidden. So in other words, it hides it. Well, DD menu item is a global variable. In fact, there's 3 global variables to this script: timeout, close timer, and DD menu item. So it's a global variable. Now, what actually is DD menu item? It obviously has properties, .style, .visibility, that I can set, but it actually, when you first start this when you first run this JavaScript, it doesn't have any value. It doesn't exist. It does exist once you call the function mopen for the first time, because DD menu item is set to equal the document.getItem element by ID, which you should be familiar with, and the ID is M1, which is what you've passed over, and that M1 is the div tag. So you set DD menu item to be equal to that div. Once that div is, once this DD menu item is set to the div, I can now set the style.visibility. So in the case of mopen, it sets the DD menu item to be equal to that div, and it sets the visibility to be equal to visible. The reason for this first line here that you see is that if there was previous menu item open, you want to close it. You want to make it hidden. So what's actually happening here is I'm taking div tags and I'm displaying them and making them hidden as we go along. All right, so now we can move a little bit further along the way here of what we're doing here. So as we can see, what's happening here is, in this case, I've made that div down here visible. When I move over to here, I make this div visible. And because I cancel the timer, this section here doesn't hover on the screen. If I were to go out like this, notice it stays and then disappears. There's actually a timer that holds it there for 1 second. And that's for the usability of the user. If you make it disappear immediately, it really becomes a less usable menu. You want to have it hover for just a second. All right, so let's go down and look at that div. When you go over, when you do a mouse over on this, the first thing you do is you cancel the close time, which turns off the timer, and then on the next one you call the m close time. So let's go back up to those functions and look at that one. On m cancel close timer, okay, you check to see if the close timer exists, okay, if it's going to be answered true or false, whether it's there, and then you basically clear the timeout, and you set the close timer equal to null. Okay, when you close it, you set a timeout, an m close and a timeout, which is a 1 second timeout, so that it will actually keep that div available there for that 1 second. So when you click on the document, also you have that ability that when you click on something, it closes that DD menu item also. So it's kind of an interesting ability to do that. Here, that actual close function, in other words, when you do a set timeout says, okay, call this function after this period of time. Okay, so that's what's actually occurring there. Well, this function is mclose, and mclose checks to see if DD menu item exists, and if it does, it sets it to hidden. So, when you have set that timer, or you set the timeout, this closer timer says, I'm going to go for whatever period that I set here. By the way, in this case, I set 1,000, which is by 1,000 milliseconds. And after 1,000 milliseconds, which is 1 second, it's going to set the timeout, which is going to call mclose on that specific period of time. So it calls the mclose, and it sets it to hidden. Now, I can change this number very easily and set it, say, to 2 seconds or half a second. Okay, very straightforward, very easy to do. Okay, when I cancel the close time, I'm basically stopping the timer. Okay, the timer immediately stops, so you're not timing at all. So as you can see, it may look a little confusing at first, but as you work through that, you can see, and especially if you review how timers work, you can see it's relatively straightforward. Okay, now the last little piece of this is looking at, and by the way, if you look at the other menus, this is M1. Okay, the next line item is M2. Okay, because this div here is M2, and then the other 3 don't have those. So the last little piece that we want to look at is we want to look at the styles. Now my styles are actually in a menu.css, and I have menu.css here. So I've got some cascading style sheets here. Now the style that I've defined a specific style SDMM. Okay, and I can go back over to here to see where SDMM is, and you'll notice that the SDMM is the ID of that UL. So this style will be applied to SDMM. So basically it's going to be applied to the entire unordered list. Nice thing here is that I can create multiple styles with different ID tags that go with them, and I can have different menus on the same page with different styles. We're just going to cover a little bit about how this style sheet works. First thing that we're going to deal with is, and pretty much everything in here is simply color, but there are a few that are worth looking at. One is the list item. Okay, it has a float left, which says within the container, which we're going to talk about containers in the box model, but within the container you're going to float to the left of the container. So whatever shows here as a list, as an LI, is going to be floating to the left of the container itself. This is specifically applied to all list items, LIs, within SDDM. Now, there's anchors within that list item. And I have two things I want to do to those anchors. I want to have one way that it's going to display, okay, when you don't have the mouse over it, which is this formatting here. And then I want to have a second way that it's displayed when I'm actually doing the pseudo class of hover. So if I go back over here to my menu, okay, when I hover, you can see that's a list item, hover, and then the other ones have their own specifically ones that are within a div. This is within a list item anchor, and this is within a div anchor. And I have both of those here in my cascading style sheet. I have embedded within the div, I have div anchor, and I have div anchor hover. And it's kind of interesting to see how those that you have this within SDDM, within the div, within the anchor, what kind of formatting you're going to have. Now, as you work and more with cascading style sheets, you get better and better at all the different things that are available within CSS. But this really does give you some great capability of seeing how all the different pieces work together. So, in summary, I have a HTML body that contains a unordered list, which contains list items. The unordered list has an ID, and the list items have anchors within them and a div within them. The anchor having event on mouse over, on mouse out, which call JavaScript functions, and the div having an ID and on mouse over and on mouse out, which call JavaScript functions. These JavaScript functions display the div or hide the div and do it based on a timer, which allows them to hover for 1 second past the time that you have that. The JavaScript, as you can see, is relatively short and relatively simple. You have four functions, and the four functions each have only the top of 4 lines of code in them. So it's very, very straightforward. Okay. Then the formatting itself is left to the cascading style sheet. Now, here's one thing I want to show you. I'm just going to do this for an example. I'm going to comment out this link tag here, okay, which just basically that's a comment, and I'm going to save it with the comment, and I'm going to reload this. This is with the cascading style sheet handling the formatting. If I reload this, this is what it looks like without the cascading style sheet formatting. And you notice it actually still kind of acts like a menu. Okay, if I go over download it, it hovers there, and if I go away from it, it waits 1 second and disappears. But as you can see, the menu is much better with the cascading style sheet and that visibility that you get with it. But it is interesting to see that it still works. The JavaScript still executes without the CSS. And I have all these, there's the menu items. Okay, it just doesn't have that beautiful formatting that goes with it. So this should be something that can get you definitely started and working better on working with cascading style sheets and JavaScript. Good programming. Have a good time with this. This is going to be some fun programming as you get into it. Thanks. Bye.